Russia, the largest country in the world and a major participant in what could potentially be the most significant conflict of this century, possesses a complex nature that extends beyond its size and military actions. While I must acknowledge that, like many others discussing the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, I lack the qualifications to delve into the intricate details of the conflict, it is crucial to recognize that this confrontation is being waged not only with tanks and fighter jets, but also with economic strategies. Viewing the situation from this perspective can provide valuable insights into a country that, by various measures, evokes both fear and curiosity. Amid the constant updates and analysis surrounding the situation in Ukraine, a recurring soundbite insists that Russia's economy is relatively feeble despite its vast expanse, abundant resources, and substantial population. Comparisons have been made between Russia's national output and that of individual American states such as Texas and Florida, although this juxtaposition may be somewhat misleading. Texas, for instance, possesses a massive economy, but it would be misguided to draw a direct parallel. Such comparisons fail to convey the complete picture, as it is the wasted opportunities and missteps over the past 3 decades that truly illustrate the situation. It is important to note that Russia had the potential to become one of the wealthiest and most prosperous nations globally had different choices been made. In under a decade, its output skyrocketed by over 800%, demonstrating a remarkable growth rate. The population was eager to embrace the principles of a free market, willing to work tirelessly towards a brighter future, and the international community, for the most part, desired Russia's success to avoid a return to the Cold War era. So, what went wrong? Simply put, Russia's economic story goes beyond headline figures. It is a tale of missed opportunities and suboptimal decisions. While it is tempting to label the 11th largest economy in the world as inadequate, doing so fails to capture the nuances of the situation. Russia had the potential to achieve far more, but it faltered along the way. It is not merely the size of the economy that matters, but the choices made and the potential left unrealized. In summary, Russia, with its vast dimensions and prominent role in the ongoing conflict, exhibits a multifaceted character. Its economy, though often depicted as underwhelming, represents a tale of untapped potential and unfulfilled promise. By exploring the economic dimension of this situation, we can gain a deeper understanding of a nation that is simultaneously intimidating and enigmatic. The birth of the Russian Federation and its present-day economy can be traced back to the end of 1991, when the Soviet Union officially dissolved. This significant event left behind a power vacuum, with Russia emerging alongside other nations such as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Ukraine. The sudden disappearance of the Soviet Union, once the world's second most powerful entity, created a profound sense of uncertainty. Having witnessed the failed attempt at pure communism in 1989, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the USSR, was not inclined to prolong his public presence. This paved the way for Boris Yeltsin, a former high-ranking Soviet politician, to become the singular ruler of the new Russian Federation. While the Western world celebrated the demise of their arch-nemesis after decades of rivalry, they harbored concerns about the future trajectory of Russia. Paradoxically, they were more apprehensive about Russia than they had been during the preceding years. This moment marked the most drastic power shift in world history, disregarding the humanitarian crisis that unfolded as millions of people found themselves uncertain about employment, sustenance, and the functioning of their new country. Concurrently, the rest of the world grappled with a more profound issue, a fragile state with a substantial stockpile of weapons, capable of regressing into another communist adversary. Given Yeltsin's background as a former Soviet politician, there were concerns that he might revert the country back to a Soviet-style government. Recognizing this potential threat and desiring to stabilize the situation, a plan was devised based on a handbook published by the International Monetary Fund and other international financial institutions. Now, let me pose a question to you. Suppose you have a country that has utterly failed, its government has collapsed, its currency is defunct, and people are unsure about ownership and basic necessities. Essentially, everything is starting from scratch. What would you do? Fortunately, some brilliant minds had already devised a comprehensive plan to address this very predicament. The Washington Consensus can be likened to an instruction manual from IKEA, providing guidance on how to build a national economy using flat-pack components. It consists of 10 fundamental instructions: fiscal policy discipline, avoiding excessive fiscal debts relative to GDP, redirecting public spending from indiscriminate subsidies to pro-growth, pro-poor services like primary education, primary health care, and infrastructure investment, tax reform, broadening the tax base and adopting moderate marginal tax rates, market-determined and positive, yet moderate, real-term interest rates, competitive exchange rates, trade liberalization, eliminating quantitative restrictions such as quotas, licensing, and tariffs, liberalization of inward foreign direct investment, privatization of state enterprises, deregulation, legal security for property rights. By implementing these measures, an economy can be established. However, some instructions were easier to implement than others. Trade liberalization, for instance, initially progressed slowly among former Soviet peers. Eventually, Russia began trading its raw materials with the rest of the world. In 1992, Russia introduced a new currency, which could be exchanged for the old Soviet ruble. An amusing anecdote relates to the 1 ruble coin, which was worth less than 1 American cent but shared almost identical size and weight with the 5 Swiss franc coin. This led many Russians to exchange bags of ruble coins for snacks from Swiss vending machines, showcasing their swift embrace of capitalism. Yet, the crucial point lies in the privatization of state enterprises. While examples like China may suggest that opening up to international trade and embracing the free market guarantees economic growth, Russia's experience tells a different story. In the decade following the Soviet Union's fall, Russia's GDP actually declined by more than half. The primary cause was the mishandled privatization of the nation's industries. In the Soviet Union, all industries were state-owned, but the Washington Consensus recommends privatizing value-adding industries. This recommendation serves 2 purposes: establishing a free market foundation for economic reform and generating significant revenue for the country in a short period. Governments worldwide sell public assets to obtain cash, essentially generating seed capital for a new business venture. In the case of former communist nations, selling off state assets represents an opportunity to mobilize resources on a national scale. In summary, the Washington Consensus provided a roadmap for building the Russian economy from scratch. While some measures were easier to implement, the botched privatization of industries significantly impacted Russia's economic performance in the aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse. Russia possessed valuable industries, with natural resource extraction being prominent, along with telecommunications, utilities, and manufacturing. The question arose, who should control these industries? The logical answer would be the highest bidder. However, there were challenges. At that time, Western companies would have been the highest bidders. Understandably, the new Russian Federation was hesitant to allow American companies to control their oil fields. Consequently, most of these assets were sold internally. The problem was that individuals emerging from a failed socialist state typically lacked the necessary funds to make realistic bids on national infrastructure. Corruption followed closely, solidifying Russia's fate for the ensuing decades. Officials responsible for allocating the nation's industries were bribed to award factories and mines to well-connected individuals, often family members or those offering the most significant bribes. As a result, major industries ended up in the hands of a small number of highly corrupt individuals. Moreover, This process deprived the country of the revenue it could have generated had the privatization been handled more fairly. These well-connected individuals, known as oligarchs, not only mismanaged these industries, but also funneled their ill-gotten gains abroad. The Russian government's insistence on maintaining a high foreign exchange rate facilitated this process. Any money earned within Russia by the oligarchs could be converted to American dollars or, more commonly, British pounds at a rate higher than the free market dictated. The Russian government spent substantial sums to maintain this exchange rate, but it only served to assist wealthy and corrupt Russian businessmen in purchasing properties and football teams in countries they deemed worth investing in. This capital flight made it challenging for the government to raise funds, forcing them to rely on continued international borrowing. In 1998, the situation reached a critical point when a failed war in Chechnya coincided with the Asian financial crisis, resulting in the new Russian Federation's first economic crisis. The government could no longer meet its debt obligations, and the exchange rate experienced a sharp decline. Mismanaged industries failed to attract buyers, both foreign and domestic, and companies struggled to pay their employees, leading to widespread labor unrest across the country. Foreign investors fled, further depressing asset markets and causing a run on the reserves of the Russian central bank. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund intervened with a $22 billion injection to provide support. These institutions were willing to offer assistance not only due to their core function, but also because nobody wanted this financial turmoil to push Russia back towards Soviet-style socialism. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, it was later revealed that as much as $5 billion of that injection was embezzled by connected officials as soon as the funds entered Russia. However, this sharp decline following a disappointing decade served as a catalyst for the Russian turnaround. Russian fortunes began to change after the economic crash, driven by several factors. Firstly, there was a limited downward trajectory left for the country to experience. Moreover, although the 80% devaluation of the currency was detrimental to the overall economy, it facilitated the repayment of debts and unpaid wages with relative ease. Additionally, Russia benefited greatly from the steady rise in oil prices that characterized the subsequent decade. During this period, Vladimir Putin assumed the presidency, succeeding the ailing Boris Yeltsin, who handed over power to his prime minister. Putin implemented a series of reforms that, to be fair, had positive effects on the economy. However, his first notable action took place on December 31, 1999, with the enactment of a decree titled On Guarantees for the Former President of the Russian Federation and the Members of His Family. This decree ensured that corruption charges against the outgoing president and his family members would not be pursued, a convenient presidential pardon for the ex-president's corruption scandal, which incidentally involved Putin himself. Not the most auspicious start, to say the least. Despite ongoing corruption issues, Russia fared well over the following decade. Large industries became increasingly consolidated, enabling them to compete with international counterparts. However, the real winner was the domestic market. For the first time, Russian citizens gained access to a financial system akin to what is commonly taken for granted in the Western world. They could borrow money, secure formal employment, and utilize their income to support legitimate businesses within the country. While significant wealth remained concentrated in the hands of a privileged few, an aspect that occurs in various economies worldwide, it's worth acknowledging that such disparities are an inherent part of a free market economy. We'll delve into this further later. Furthermore, Russia managed to navigate the global financial crisis of 2008 relatively unscathed. Due to their novelty and lack of sophistication, Russian banks avoided many of the problems caused by complex financial instruments prevalent in advanced economies. However, they did experience a temporary setback due to the sharp decline in oil prices during that period. Nevertheless, by 2013, robust growth had resumed, and the Russian economy had expanded more than tenfold compared to the lows of the 1990 financial crisis. The new president, Putin, certainly sparked controversy. Yet, sometimes a struggling nation requires strong leadership to steer it in the right direction. However, the primary concern was the distribution of this newfound prosperity, a point that became especially evident in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea. In response to the alarming actions taken by the Russian government, the United States, the European Union, Australia, Canada, and Japan imposed sanctions on Russia. These sanctions had three main components. Firstly, they prohibited the provision of technology for oil and gas extraction. Secondly, they imposed travel restrictions on international Russian individuals who were closely associated with President Putin, commonly referred to as oligarchs. Lastly, they banned the extension of credits to Russian oil companies and state banks. The last measure was particularly significant, as it aimed to deprive the Russian state of the resources necessary to sustain hostile activities. However, in practice, these sanctions did not have a substantial impact for a couple of reasons. They were not exceptionally stringent, and they were swiftly rolled back after their implementation. Russia had also prepared itself to some extent for the sanctions. Decades of international oil and gas trade had resulted in substantial foreign currency reserves for the country. Since most oil is traded in US dollars, the Russian government and businesses easily accumulated significant amounts of the world's reserve currency to safeguard against future uncertainties. While Russia did need to tap into some of these reserves, and the value of the ruble did decline in global markets, this devaluation had certain positive implications for Russian export businesses. A weakened domestic currency made them more competitive in international markets. Nevertheless, there were repercussions from the sanctions. The economy contracted, and the country faced higher levels of inflation due to the restriction of imported goods. This led to limited supplies of various items, ranging from food to medicine, as the focus shifted to local production. This period was challenging for the average Russian citizen. However, it seemed that the decision-makers responsible for these actions showed little concern for the impact on the general population. Russia potentially holds the title for being the most unequal country in the world. While I've mentioned this regarding a few other places before, the measurement we use to assess inequality, called the Gini coefficient, reveals some striking disparities. In the case of Russia, we are specifically examining wealth inequality. The Gini coefficient assigns economies a score on a scale of 0 to 1, or 0 to 100, depending on the source. A score of 0 signifies perfect equality, where everyone possesses the same amount of wealth, while 100 means that all the wealth in a country is concentrated in the hands of a single person, leaving others with nothing. According to the World Bank, Russia's wealth Gini coefficient stands at 37.5, which is not an impressive figure, yet not abysmal either. It is certainly better than the United States' 41.4, but far from South Africa's top position at 63. However, it's crucial to recognize that these statistics rely on the available data accessible to the World Bank. The financial elites in Russia, including the president himself, have repeatedly been exposed for shifting their wealth worldwide to conceal and safeguard their true assets. Studies from institutions like Credit Suisse have proposed that if this hidden wealth were brought back and factored into Russia's calculations, the country would likely top the charts as the most unequal in the world. The implications of this inequality are significant. The individuals with money and power, who can influence policy decisions, are not the ones directly affected by these sanctions. Russian banks facing liquidity issues can easily tap into foreign currency reserves and redirect lending away from regular consumers. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens struggle to access basic necessities and build a future in a deteriorating nation. In a typical democracy, such circumstances could spell the end for those in power. However, Russia has never truly functioned as a genuine democracy. In countries like Australia or America, political leaders maintain their positions by keeping the voting population satisfied. While political donations and influential news networks can influence outcomes, ultimately, it comes down to the votes. In Russia, on the other hand, holding onto power entails appeasing the same group of individuals who maneuvered and bribed their way into owning the nation's major industries. This brings us to present-day Russia, a nation that has amassed substantial wealth through the sale of oil and gas to numerous countries heavily reliant on these natural resources. It is a country where a privileged few hold power for the exclusive benefit of their own small circle. Surprisingly, Russia's foreign reserves have even grown larger than they were back in 2014, underscoring its financial strength. Unfortunately, Russia has faced minimal repercussions for its past aggressive actions. In conclusion, Russia's economy faces challenges stemming from sanctions, geopolitical factors, and natural resource dependency. However, efforts to diversify the economy, invest in infrastructure, embrace technology, and foster regional integration provide potential opportunities for sustainable growth and increased resilience. Addressing income inequality, combating corruption, and promoting a favorable business environment remain critical to unlocking the country's full economic potential.